The air in the Aspen cabin smelled like faux pine and expensive desperation. You know the scent, that sharp, chemical tang of fake snow mixed with the ozone hum of a dozen ring lights. It was my sister Sierra's idea of a perfect Christmas. Or rather, her brand's idea. Every pillow was fluffed to within an inch of its life. Every cookie was a prop. And my entire family was just set dressing for her live stream. My name is Gabrielle. And I'm a pediatric trauma nurse. I spend my days pulling children back from the edge, stitching up wounds that shouldn't exist. But in that cabin, surrounded by thousands of dollars of rented aesthetic, I was useless. I was holding my 8-month-old son, Leo, trying to keep him quiet so he wouldn't ruin the audio. It happened in a split second. Sierra was in the middle of a monologue about mindful holiday traditions, wearing a $12,000 couture gown she'd borrowed for the shoot. She leaned in to coo at Leo for the camera, her smile brittle and bright. And then, Leo did what babies do. He spit up. A tiny, milky stain bloomed on the silk of her shoulder. The slap cracked through the room like a gunshot. It wasn't a tap. It wasn't a reflex. It was a backhand. Fast and vicious, connecting with my baby's soft cheek. Leo went silent. That terrible, breathless pause before a scream. And in that silence, I looked at my family. My mother wasn't rushing to the baby. She was rushing to Sierra, dabbing at the dress with a napkin. My father was checking the camera angle. No one moved for my son. In that frozen, horrifying moment, I realized the truth. I wasn't safe here, and neither was my child. Before I tell you what my husband did next, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. Leo's scream tore through the cabin. A raw, jagged sound that shattered the curated holiday atmosphere. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I just moved, dropping to my knees on the hardwood floor to scoop him up. My hands, usually steady enough to find a vein in a dehydrated toddler, were trembling. I pulled his face to mine, my eyes scanning his cheek with clinical precision. There was already swelling. The imprint of Sierra's rings was beginning to rise against his skin, angry and red. "Do you have any idea how much the deposit is on this?" Sierra shrieked. She wasn't looking at the crying infant. She was frantically dabbing at her shoulder with a napkin, her face twisted in a mask of pure, narcissistic rage. "This is vintage silk, Gabrielle. It stains if you even look at it wrong." I waited for my mother to step in. I waited for Susan, the woman who claimed her grandbabies were her whole world on Facebook, to rush over and check on Leo. Instead, she rushed to Sierra. She adjusted the ring light, angling it away from the commotion. Then she turned to me, her eyes hard and cold. "Fix his face," she hissed, her voice low so the microphone wouldn't pick it up. "Turn him away from the camera. The redness is going to show in the 4K feed. You're ruining the aesthetic." I stared at her, the air leaving my lungs. "He is hurt," I said, the words feeling thick and foreign in my mouth. "He is fine," my mother snapped, smoothing Sierra's hair. Then she leaned in closer, delivering the whisper that hurt worse than the slap. "You knew he had a sensitive stomach. You should have burped him better. Honestly, Gabrielle, sometimes I think you do these things on purpose, just to sabotage your sister's success." In that moment, a fire should have ignited in my chest. I should have screamed. I should have flipped the table, smashed the lights, and burned the cabin to the ground. But I didn't. I stood there, frozen, clutching my sobbing child, unable to form a sentence. For years, I wondered why I stayed silent in moments like this. Why did I let them treat me like an accessory to their main event? It wasn't weakness. It was the invisible chain of the survivor. When you grow up in a house where maintaining the image is more important than reality, you are trained, day by day, to suppress your survival instincts. It's a prison with no bars, built brick by brick with guilt and obligation. You learn that speaking up doesn't bring justice, it brings punishment. You learn that your pain is an inconvenience to the people who are supposed to love you. I felt that chain tightening around my throat now, choking back the rage. I was a pediatric trauma nurse. I could run a code blue on a dying child without blinking. But here, in front of my mother and sister, I was just the scapegoat again. I was the problem. I was the one who had ruined Christmas by allowing my son to be assaulted. Sierra was checking her reflection in the monitor, composing her face into a look of tragic patience. "Okay. We can edit this," she muttered. "I will do a voiceover about the challenges of motherhood. Just get him out of the shot." "Gabrielle, seriously. You are killing the vibe." I looked at them, my mother fussing over the lighting, my sister fussing over her dress, my father pretending to be invisible in the corner. They weren't a family. They were a corporation, and my son wasn't a person to them. He was just a defective prop that had malfunctioned on set. The chain snapped. The air pressure in the room dropped. You know that feeling when a thunderstorm is about to break directly over your head? That was Caleb. He had been leaning against the doorframe, silent, watching the entire performance. Now, he pushed off the wood. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He moved with the terrifying efficiency of a man who clears rooms for a living. In 2 strides, he crossed the open-plan living room and placed his body between Sierra and us. He looked down at my sister. He didn't blink. He didn't raise his voice. He used a tone I hadn't heard since his last deployment debrief, a frequency so low and calm it vibrated in your chest. "Get out of my sight," he said. Sierra laughed. A nervous, high-pitched titter. She tried to reach around him to adjust the camera tripod. "Caleb, relax. You're being intense." It was just a reflex. Honestly, Leo startled me. Caleb caught her wrist. He didn't squeeze, but he stopped her movement instantly. "This is not a negotiation. Sierra, you just assaulted a defenseless child. You are a threat. Remove yourself from this room before I forget that I am an officer and remember that I am a father." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. My father, Gary, finally stood up from his corner chair. "Now, hold on. Adre, there's no need for threats. Let's not ruin the weekend over a little accident." Caleb didn't even look at him. He turned to me, his eyes scanning Leo's face, assessing the injury with military detachment. "Gabrielle, pack the bag. We are leaving." "Now? You can't leave," my mother cried, finally finding her voice. She wasn't looking at Leo's red cheek. She was looking at the contract on the table. "The brand rep is coming tomorrow. We need the family shots for the generational love segment. If you leave, you breach the verbal agreement. I don't care about your contract," I said, my voice shaking as I grabbed the diaper bag. "I care about my son." We walked out. We didn't say goodbye. We didn't hug. It was a hostile extraction. Caleb marched us to the rental SUV, buckled Leo in with gentle hands, and got behind the wheel. He drove us down the mountain roads in silence, his knuckles white on the leather, the cabin, the lights, the fake snow. It all disappeared in the rearview mirror. I thought it was over. I thought we had escaped. But we hadn't even reached the highway before my phone started buzzing. It wasn't a text. It was a notification flood. Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. I opened the app, and my stomach dropped through the floor. Sierra hadn't wasted a second. She had posted a video. She was crying big. Vet. Mascara-stained tears. Sitting in front of the Christmas tree we had just left. The caption read, "Heartbroken. Please pray for my sister Gabrielle. Her husband had a violent PTSD episode tonight and attacked us. We are safe. But I am so worried about her and the baby living in that environment. Pray for Gabrielle." End domestic violence. I watched the video in horror. She had spun the narrative instantly. In her version, Caleb was the aggressor. She claimed he had screamed, thrown things, and scared the baby. She positioned herself as the loving, terrified auntie trying to save me from an unstable military man. "She's lying," I whispered, watching the comments roll in. Hundreds of them. "Get her out of there. Military guys are so dangerous." "Sierra, you are so brave for sharing this." Caleb glanced at the screen, then back at the road. His expression didn't change. It hardened. "She just declared war," he said. "She thinks she can destroy my career to save her sponsorship. She has no idea what she just started." We didn't go home to sleep. Sleep is a luxury for people who aren't being actively destroyed by a viral smear campaign. We went home to work. I sat at the kitchen island, watching the hashtag #PrayForGabrielle trend on Twitter. Strangers were dissecting my marriage, analyzing Caleb's facial expressions from old photos, and diagnosing him with rage disorders. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of digital noise. Caleb didn't look at the comments. He didn't engage with the trolls. He sat across from me, opened his military-grade laptop, and cracked his knuckles. "Stop reading," he said, his voice cutting through my panic. "That is the distraction. We need the source code. She has millions of followers. Caleb, she controls the narrative. How do we fight that?" "We don't fight the narrative," he said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "We audit the asset. You see, Sierra was brilliant at branding, but she was terrible at cybersecurity. She had forgotten that 2 years ago, when she launched her channel, she had asked Caleb to set up her cloud storage and redundant backups. She had forgotten that he still had the admin keys. "We are in," he said. He didn't look at the current live stream where Sierra was currently sobbing to her audience. He went straight to the archive. Specifically, the folder marked "Raw Footage Do Not Use." We spent the next 4 hours watching the monster behind the mask. It wasn't just the slap. It was a library of cruelty. We watched a clip from 3 months ago where she pinched a neighbor's toddler hard on the arm until he cried, just so she could take a thumbnail photo of herself comforting him. We watched her scream obscenities at a 4-year-old for dropping a prop cookie. We watched her force-feed a baby until he vomited, just to get the perfect, messy face shot. It was systematic. It was industrial-scale abuse disguised as content. "She's done," I whispered, feeling sick. "This ends her." "Wait," Caleb said. "There is more." He switched tabs to her synced email accounts. He wasn't looking for abuse anymore. He was following the money. He searched for my parents' names. The search results populated the screen, and the air left the room. It wasn't just a few gifts or covered dinners. It was a payroll. Subject: October management fee. Caleb read aloud. Amount: $4,000. Recipient: Susan and Gary. There were dozens of them. Monthly transfers. Performance bonuses. My parents weren't just enabling a golden child, they were employees protecting their employer. They took a 20% cut of every sponsorship deal Sierra landed. I stared at the screen, the numbers blurring. The reason my mother rushed to fix Sierra's dress instead of checking my son's face wasn't favoritism. It was financial preservation. She didn't see a grandchild, she saw a damaged asset that might hurt the bottom line. They had sold us out. They had sold Leo out for 20%. Caleb closed the laptop. The look on his face wasn't anger anymore. It was the cold, final clarity of a judge passing a death sentence. "They aren't your parents, Gabrielle," he said. "They are accomplices. and we are going to burn their entire operation to the ground. The trap arrived 3 days later. Not via a process server, but through a push notification. Sierra posted a digital invitation to her 3 million followers. It was an image of a single white rose on a velvet background. The text read, "An evening for pure child, breaking the cycle of bullying," but it was the caption that twisted the knife. Family is complicated. Mental health is messy. But tonight, I am extending a public olive branch to my sister Gabrielle. I hope she joins me to heal. Forgiveness. Sisters, she wasn't inviting me. She was cornering me. If I didn't show up, I was the bitter, unstable sister who refused to heal. If I did show up, I was a prop in her redemption arc, tacitly admitting that her version of the story was true. She thought she had checkmated us. She thought she was playing chess against a nurse and a soldier. She forgot that Caleb didn't play games. He ran operations. "We go," Caleb said, adjusting his cufflinks. He wasn't wearing his uniform tonight. He was wearing a black suit that cost more than my first car. She wants a show? We give her a finale. Walking into that ballroom felt like walking into the cabin all over again. Just scaled up. The air was thick with expensive perfume and hypocrisy. Pure Child logos were projected onto every wall. Waiters circulated with champagne. And there, holding court in the center, were my parents. Susan and Gary were wearing new clothes, likely bought with their 20% cut of my son's exploitation. When they saw me, they didn't look ashamed. They looked relieved. In their minds, my presence meant the payroll was safe. We took our seats in the back. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. And Sierra walked out. She looked angelic. She was wearing white, always white, symbolizing a purity she had sold long ago. She walked to the podium, gripped the microphone with trembling hands, and looked out at the sea of donors, sponsors, and the CEO of Pure Child. A stern woman named Eleanor Vance, who was holding an oversized check for $1.5 million. "Thank you," Sierra whispered, her voice cracking perfectly on cue. "This campaign means the world to me. You know, growing up, I didn't always feel safe." I watched her weave the lie. It was masterful. She talked about generational trauma and volatile environments. She never named Caleb, but she painted a picture of a terrified woman trying to save her nephew from a violent home. She appropriated my pain, my fear, and my reality. And she wore it like a costume. "Forgiveness is hard," she said, wiping away a single, photogenic tear. "But tonight, I choose love. I choose to support my sister, no matter how difficult her struggles are." The room erupted in applause. People were wiping their eyes. Eleanor Vance was nodding, uncapping her fountain pen to sign the contract that would make Sierra the global face of gentle parenting. Sierra looked up. Her eyes scanned the room until they locked on mine. She smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was a shark's grin. It was the look of someone who believes they are untouchable. She thought my silence was submission. She thought I was sitting there, defeated, ready to play the role of the broken sister she had so graciously forgiven. She didn't know that Caleb had his phone under the table. She didn't know he had already bypassed the venue's firewall. She thought she was signing a contract. She was signing her confession. Eleanor Vance uncapped her pen. The nib hovered over the signature line of the oversized ceremonial check, a millimeter away from finalizing a $1.5 million mistake. The room was holding its breath, caught in the manufactured emotion of Sierra's performance. Beside me, Caleb didn't move a muscle. He didn't stand up to shout an objection. He didn't storm the stage. He simply removed his phone from his inner pocket, unlocked the screen, and tapped a single icon. It wasn't magic. It was reconnaissance. Caleb had spent the last 48 hours mapping the venue's AV network. He knew the projector wasn't hardwired. It was on a secure Bluetooth node for ease of access during presentations. Or at least, what the venue considered secure. To a naval intelligence officer, it was an open door. The massive screen behind Sierra flickered. The Pure Child logo distorted, pixelating into static. The audio system popped. A sharp electronic screech that made half the room cover their ears. Sierra turned around, confused, her angelic mask slipping just a fraction. Technical difficulties. She joked into the microphone, her laugh tight. Live TV. Right? Then the static cleared, and the room filled with the sound of a baby crying. It wasn't the soft, cooing cry of a commercial. It was the jagged, terrified scream of my son. The video played in 4K resolution, projected 10 feet tall. There was the cabin. There was the spit-up. And there was Sierra's hand, connecting with Leo's face. The sound of the slap was amplified by the ballroom's concert-grade speakers. It cracked like a whip. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was a physical weight, pressing the air out of the lungs of 300 people. On screen, the video continued. It showed my mother rushing to the dress. It showed my father checking the camera. It showed me, frozen, clutching my child. Sierra stood on stage, paralyzed. She looked at the screen, then at the audience, her mouth opening and closing in silent horror. But Caleb wasn't done. He swiped his thumb across his phone screen. The video cut. A new file loaded. This wasn't one clip, it was a montage. A forensic audit of cruelty. Timestamp, August 12th. Sierra pinching a 3-year-old's arm until he wailed. Then immediately smiling at the camera to say, "He is just so emotional today." Timestamp, September 4th. Sierra screaming at her own mother, her face twisted in a demoniac rage. "Fix the lighting. You useless leech. Or you don't get paid this month." The crowd gasped. A collective, involuntary intake of breath. Caleb swiped again. The video feed cut to static images. Documents. Emails. Bank transfers. He didn't just show them, he zoomed in on the relevant lines, highlighting the text in neon yellow. From Sierra to Gary and Susan. Subject: October silence fee. Body: transferring the usual 20%. Keep Gabrielle quiet about the bruises. If she talks, the money stops. Amount: $4,200. I looked at the front row. My parents were staring at the screen, their faces illuminated by the glow of their own corruption. My father looked gray, like a man watching his own autopsy. But my mother, I watched Susan. She wasn't looking at the screen anymore. She was looking at the floor, weeping. But as I watched her, I realized something that turned my stomach. She wasn't crying for Leo. She wasn't crying because she had been exposed as an accomplice to child abuse. She was crying because she felt victimized. It's the cognitive dissonance of the enabler. In that moment, watching the evidence of her betrayal, projected 40 feet wide, her brain was frantically rewriting reality to protect her ego. She couldn't accept that she was a monster who sold her grandchild for a monthly stipend. So, she was telling herself a new story. They tricked us. We did what we had to do to survive. Gabrielle is cruel for doing this to us publicly. She was mourning the loss of her illusion, not the loss of her integrity. She genuinely believed that exposing the crime was a worse sin than committing it. The projection ended. The screen went black. Eleanor Vance slowly stood up. She capped her pen. The click echoed in the silent room. She didn't look at the audience. She didn't look at her staff. She walked up the stairs to the podium, stood directly in front of Sierra, and looked her in the eye. "You are a predator," Eleanor said. Her voice wasn't amplified, but in the dead silence, everyone heard it. Eleanor took the oversized check, ripped it in half, and let the pieces fall to the stage floor. Then she turned and walked out of the ballroom. The sound of her heels clicking on the marble floor was the only noise in the world. Sierra stood alone on stage, the white rose background now gone, leaving her in the harsh, unforgiving spotlight. She looked small. She looked breakable. She looked exactly like the person she was. Caleb put his phone back in his pocket. He adjusted his cufflink. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply looked at me and nodded. The execution was complete. The ballroom dissolved into chaos. It wasn't the polite murmuring of a scandalized crowd. It was the raw, ugly sound of a family eating itself alive. Sierra wasn't looking at the audience anymore. She was screaming at our parents. "You were supposed to fix this," she shrieked. Her face mottled and ugly under the stage lights. "I pay you to handle her. Why didn't you stop them?" My mother, still weeping on the floor, looked up. "We tried. We told her to stay away. This isn't our fault. It is your fault." Sierra lunged toward the edge of the stage. "You are useless. Both of you. You're fired. You hear me? You don't get another dime." Caleb leaned over to me. "Watch this," he whispered. He tapped his phone one last time. The screen on stage changed. It wasn't a video. It was a single spreadsheet. A forensic accounting of the management fees. It showed the 20% cut Sierra knew about. But below that, highlighted in red, was a second column, diversion account. My parents hadn't just been taking their cut. They had been skimming an extra 15% off the top of every contract for 5 years, funneling it into a private offshore account. They were stealing from the golden child to fund their own exit strategy. Sierra froze. She looked at the numbers. She looked at our parents. "You stole from me?" she whispered. My father, who had been silent until now, suddenly lunged at Caleb. "Turn it off. You have no right." But he didn't reach us. Security, finally mobilized by the venue manager, intercepted him. The screaming started again. But this time, it was a three-way war. Sierra attacking the parents attacking each other, all of them drowning in the wreckage of their own greed. "Let's go," Caleb said. We stood up. We didn't look back. We walked out of the ballroom, past the stunned guests, past the ruins of the Pure Child Gala, and into the cool night air. We got into the car and drove away. We didn't go back to the hotel. We drove straight to the airport and flew home. The next few weeks were a blur of legal paperwork and quiet mornings. We filed the permanent restraining order. We included the footage of the slap, the embezzlement evidence, and the threats. The judge granted it without a hearing. Sierra lost everything. The Pure Child deal was just the first domino. Other sponsors dropped her within days. Her channel was demonetized for violating terms of service regarding child safety. She is currently being sued by 3 different brands for breach of contract. My parents are facing their own legal battles. Sierra is suing them for the embezzlement. They are suing her for wrongful termination. They are spending the money they stole from her to fight her in court. They are destroying each other, dollar by dollar. But I don't check their updates anymore. I am sitting on my back porch. It is evening. The house is quiet. There are no ring lights, no cameras, no production schedules. Just the sound of crickets and the soft breathing of my son, who is asleep in my arms. Caleb comes out with 2 mugs of tea. He sits beside me, resting his hand on my knee. "You okay?" he asks. I look at him. I look at Leo. "I'm free," I say, and I am. I use the settlement money from the countersuit, a substantial sum for damages and legal fees, to start something new. It's called the Leo Defense Fund. We provide pro bono legal counsel to children of influencers who are being exploited by their parents. We help them get their earnings placed in trusts. We help them get their images scrubbed from the internet. I am not just a survivor of my family. I am the person who ensures other children survive theirs. If you've ever had to choose between your peace and your family, share this story. You are not alone.